Is treating sex addiction unethical?
Welcome to the Therapy Brothers podcast.
I'm Brannon.
I'm Tyler.
We're brothers,
We're therapists.
and we know recovery.
Bring your stories, your questions, your successes with real recovery.
Hey, Tyler, you ready to have some hard conversations?
Let's do it.
Let the Therapy Brothers podcast begin.
Brannon, what is going on, man?
Good. You got any energy today?
Oh, man. My voice is so weak. I feel like I just lost my voice over the weekend, and I don't know if I've got it fully back, so I hope it's not too annoying.
We're both a bit hungover right now.
We just finished yesterday. We just finished our Rising Sun retreat, and man, what an amazing experience. What a great group of men. What a powerful experience with them. But yeah, definitely feeling almost like a hangover the next morning.
Yeah. You know, it's crazy how physically it drains us because we're just like moving chairs and equipment and all this stuff. But when you go all in, you give it your all emotionally, spiritually, all of that, and all the men there do too. You receive something great back in return. But you had to have gone all in. So if we didn't feel this way this morning, then we did something wrong. So
Yeah.
it was miraculous. The conference or the retreat was incredible, and it was because of the men that showed up there. And I think that most of them got what they were looking for. So
Yeah, to every one of you guys who came, and now that I know you differently and a little bit more personally, I just want to tell you thank you for who you are and the caliber of men that you are, and for the impact and effect that you had on my life this weekend. I'm so grateful to have been a part of it.
Yeah, it's awesome. Well, should we dive into the topic?
Let's go, Brannon.
Yeah, we hesitated to dive in because we are low on energy today, and it's a very kind of, I think, complex, interesting topic that we have. But I think it's really important that we talk about it. So, should I give a little background?
Yeah,
Tyler?
why don't you give a little bit of background, and then let's have a conversation, see where it goes.
Yeah, and you can chime in on the background too. A lot of people are following the story of Jodi Hildebrandt, who recently ended up in jail. And if you're not, then you can Google her and you can check it out and you can figure out what's going on there. But to kind of summarize quickly what's going on, Jodi for a long time was treating sex addiction and betrayal trauma, and she was very embedded in the communities here, and really connected to the church. And she was receiving a lot of referrals and things from church leaders. And then she was taking those referrals and putting people in systems of really kind of rigid systems of control, shame, sexual self-rejection, and calling that recovery, and kind of chewing people up and spitting them out with a lot more shame, a lot more disconnection. And I personally watched her destroy many families. And so there's been somewhat of an outrage of Jodi got arrested a month ago. She's now in jail. And it's kind of, the more you dig down into what she's been doing over the years, it's really kind of disturbing to look at. And people are finally calling it out, and they're seeing a problem with it. And Jodi ran LifeStar, a program.
She was an affiliate with that program.
Yeah, she was an affiliate with that program called LifeStar. And there's other different sex addiction programs, right? Like outpatient programs and things. And there's kind of different trains of thought of, some people believe sex addiction isn't even real at all. And so if you treat it, then you're fighting against something completely natural.
It doesn't exist.
And so you're just causing harm and shame. Well, on the other side of things, it can be taken way too far of every time you're aroused or have some attraction outside of your marriage, you're an addict and you're bad. And so there's definitely the two sides there, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so some people who really don't believe in sex addiction are not okay with sex addiction treatment programs. And then, some people who are very rigid and religious and whatever think it's evil to say that there's no sex addiction. And so we just wanted to have a discussion about this kind of topic, and it's complicated because it's about culture, it's about sexuality, it's about addiction. It's way more complex than black and white. You shouldn't or you should treat sex addiction, right, Tyler?
Right, exactly. And this is a broad thing. It's been in our world, it's been around for a really long time, this kind of fight between the porn industry led people and groups and thinkers versus you might call it the kind of deeply religious and rigid sort of systems. And what ends up happening a lot of times, at least from my perspective, having been living in this for a really long time, is that it feels like people get more and more polarized to either end of the spectrum rather than trying to find what's actually true in the middle.
Right.
And so hopefully today, as we talk, we'll kind of at least share our own, and we'll probably have some slightly different perspectives on this, but we'll be able to share our own perspectives on what I think is going to be more of trying to find the fusion of the truth between the two places rather than taking one straight position or another.
Yeah. But it does speak to, Tyler, it's, the church and many churches have their like addiction recovery programs.
Yes.
Right. And it's interesting because in some ways, the church lays the foundation for the sexual self-rejection and the shame. And then, oh, by the way, provides this, group program to go to help, you with your problem. And so it's like, reject yourself, not be okay with yourself. And we're here to now help you, but also continue to drive home that you're not okay as you are and you need to change. And so there's that side of things where like I'll give you an example. I was riding in the van the other day with 13 guys or whatever. And I said to the guys, I said, how many of the guys in here do you think masturbated in adolescence? And they kind of laughed like, well, 100%, and so I'm kind of talking to them about it. And there's a couple very religious guys in there and kind of set in their ways. And they for years have been shaming themselves for their sexuality. They've been going to leaders to help them stop these behaviors. They've been just fixated and stressed about, deviant sexual behavior and making sure they're basically as not sexual as they possibly can be. Right. And so like, I think we're missing something here in terms of healthy sexual development, healthy sex education, teaching sex positivity, teaching sexual self-acceptance. We don't teach that hardly at all with the rigid side of things. And you and I have talked about this. None of what I just said equals permissiveness to go do whatever the heck you want. Right. And that's the fear. That's the like, well, if we go there, then we're going to, people are just going to go nuts. Right. But the reality is that covert controlling, holding it back, and then, releasing these things create a lot of compulsive behaviors and a lot of problems. And when the systems of religion or culture or whatever continue to drive those things home again and again, that individual is suffering in the dark in their own shame, right? But as a whole, there's whole systems that continue to send these messages down to them. And there even therapeutic systems at church, systems within families that continue to send this message of you better control yourself because you're disgusting and you're wrong and you're perverted and you're not okay, right? That is a problem. That is not okay. What do you think, Tyler?
No, yeah, I agree with that. I was just thinking as you were talking, the word that's going through my mind is and it doesn't really matter if we're talking about religion or family or schools or whatever, but when the motivation is compulsion, what you get is more compulsiveness.
Yeah.
I think that's kind of what you're saying. And so, but that's the other side of this is that, and this is where I think you're going is that when you say that, someone who's from a certain position goes, it's like people are already queued up to be on team yes or team no, instead of saying,
Right.
well, wait a minute though. Like, is there some decent motivation for the reason why the compulsion was happening? Maybe, but it can't be compulsive. It's got to be done in a different way. It's got to be done with education, with understanding, with acceptance, with with weighing effectiveness and pros and cons, rather than if you do this, that makes you bad. If you don't do this, that makes you bad. If you do whatever, right? It's the compulsiveness itself that's the problem.
It's the behavior. It's the compulsive behavior that causes the consequences. It's not the sexuality itself, right? Like, let's take something. Let's take an example. Let's say a guy likes to cross dress, okay, and he's cross dressed a few times, before he was married, but now he's a married guy. He likes to cross dress. He's kept it really secret for a long time. Should he cross dress?
That depends on what his value system is. And then it also depends on what I would say that it depends on whether or not it's effective for his overall goals.
Yeah, in life, what purpose? Like, it might be okay for him to cross dress. Now, let's back up a little bit. I want to ask a different question because I asked, should he cross dress? I want to ask you, is it okay that he has that desire and it's on his arousal template to cross dress?
Yeah, the same way that it's on every single young man's sort of curiosity spectrum and most young women's curiosity spectrum to wonder what's going on with their sexual feeling as they grow up.
Yes.
Like they have those feelings, and we're not there to kill the feelings.
Well, and so Tyler, come back to the topic at hand here is when we never have this conversation and we just have the conversation of don't, or it's bad. It's a sin next to murder. Like, do not, just make sure you don't, whatever it is, right? But we never have this conversation of you are a unique individual sexually with a very amazing, interesting arousal template. And it's unique and it's okay. And you're okay. When we never, ever have that, then it just leads to force, control, shame. It tears marriages apart because each partner in the marriage is saying, hey, there's this box that I have that you're supposed to fit in when it comes to your sexuality. Fit in the freaking box because the box is given to us. We know what that is. Jump in it, stay in it, and don't show me any other part of your sexuality unless you're in that box, which then leads to, okay, I need to show up inauthentic and not open and not honest in my relationship, or I'm going to get rejected and my relationship won't survive. So my option here is pretend like I'm in the box versus showing up honest, creating connection, creating intimacy, building trust together because you're actually honest and vulnerable because you accept yourself and you accept your sexuality, right?
So. Yeah, and I think that somewhere in the middle between those two things, this is maybe what ties those two sides together a little bit, is the personal choice of, living with your own integrity. If you're talking about being honest, there are certain things that even if you feel like you want to do them, they're not healthy for you, right? Like I got home last night and all I wanted to do was eat 2 racks of ribs and then 4 bowls of cold cereal. And like, and
Hey, you earned it, man.
yeah,
You earned it.
yeah, I know, because I was so depleted and worn out emotionally, spiritually, whatever. It's like, I want to do that every day. Okay, should I do that every day?
Right.
Only if I want diabetes and to be 400 pounds, and but the truth is that if I'm honest with myself, what I really want is good health. And occasionally I still love the idea, and there's a part of me that really wants to eat all of that food. I can own that I want to eat all of that food. And more often than not, I'm going to probably make the choice to not do that because I value my health more than I do that binge. Does that make sense? So,
Right.
so that's where the honesty comes in, and that's the side that people don't hear. Like when they hear what you're saying, they're like, "Oh, so you're advocating that you should just go and like do whatever you want." It's like, no, that's not what you said. You said be honest. Honest is, I have parts of me that have those drives, desires, whatever it is, and because I'm honest with myself, and if I'm in touch with my own values, now I make choices based off of my values rather than based off of the compulsion itself.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
what
Okay.
you're saying.
Yeah, you're stepping into your power. You're choosing. You have your agency. You're above board. You're living on the surface, right? Sex addiction treatment programs are a problem, Tyler. And I'm going to make a statement, and I want you to react to this statement.
Okay.
Sex addiction treatment programs are a problem when they focus on the don't, when they focus on the behavior, and when they label something an addiction when it's not. Sex addiction treatment programs are a problem. What do you say to that?
I would change that just a little bit, and I would say, if I accept the label, that's a problem. If the program is calling it a label, that's a problem. It's and this is hard, Brannon, because sexual addiction programs, like the ones we've been a part of, like I you might have a difference of opinion on this, but the way that I got into this work was through the LifeStar program. I think there's a lot to that program that has a lot to recommend it. I saw people in my own caseload get better. Their lives improved. Their compulsive behaviors started to go away. Their beliefs in themselves started to, like, their lives got better by doing that program. So I wouldn't say you can't label the whole program per se in some of these cases. It's, and this is the same as is true inside of some of the, like, this church stuff too. It's like, who's dispersing the program and how are they going about doing that? That's a bigger issue than maybe even the program itself. Right?
That's a good point.
Because we could run a LifeStar group here. I did that for several years and I saw people get better.
Yeah.
And there's going to be somebody else down the road at a different LifeStar program that's going to have run it maybe differently in terms of their approach or their energy or whatever else. And maybe it's not the same.
Tyler, I've seen Jodi run LifeStar groups, and I've seen you run groups, and the clients are getting a very different product, right? With some very similar content.
Yeah. So I mean, the content itself is the same, right? But it's the way that it's being dispersed that might be helpful or not helpful sometimes.
I do think there is room for improvement within the content. None of the content's perfect.
Sure.
But
with any program, with our program.
I know. LifeStar content, I know very well. And I can't think of, now, is it laid out perfectly? Is it designed perfectly? No. But if you understand the content isn't there to help people reject themselves, right? Now, if you throw a really rigid, judgmental, shaming therapist in the mix to run that content, then you got a problem, right? Yes. Now, I do think there are some programs with some content that is absolutely problematic, that is about force, control, just avoiding any bit of being sexual, basically. And that is in the content, right? And so, yeah,
the compulsion.
Yeah, it's about stopping the behavior.
So whether it's from the program or from the therapist or the person or the leader or whatever it is, it's the mode of compulsion that's not necessarily healthy.
Yeah. Here's the other thing, Tyler, kind of a different part of this topic. For years, I did assessments for substance abuse as to level of care for people, of where they need to go for help, whether it's inpatient or outpatient or just like once a week therapy or whatever. And so I saw the gamut, right, of people. Like, for example, I saw a woman who had jaundice completely and could not stop drinking. She needed an inpatient. And so one of the problems that I've seen with the programs, and again, it comes down to the person running the program, is to throw everybody into the same boat. I'm starting a group. I need people in my group. So you're the person who slept with 9 prostitutes last week, and you're the person who masturbated, has masturbated like once a year. Let's throw you in the same sex addiction group and work on your sex addiction. Do you see the problem with that?
Well, I think it's actually, I don't see a problem with a guy from both of those walks of life sharing the same group together. I see a problem with the way that they are defining themselves being the problem.
Yeah. So
right?
go on. Okay.
So because the principles that you're going to teach a guy who's like looking at porn once in a while are going to be similar principles to the things you teach the guy who's slept with 9 prostitutes in a week. It's that if a guy showing up having like, I had a guy one time, he acted out literally like once a year with some pornography. And he comes into me, he's like, I'm a total sex addict. And I'm like, actually,
and that's coming from all the systems. All the programming, all the everything. That's where that's coming
I'm like,
from.
You're not a sex addict, but you have this behavior that you still don't stop once a year. And it's causing you pain. It's causing you suffering. It hurts your relationship, whatever. There's some principles that could help with that. And those principles are just what I think are true principles to healthy life. It's the principles of connection to God, others, and self, with a whole bunch of other tools and things that are based on those things added. So nothing wrong with a guy like that going to a group with the other guy you just mentioned, as long as he goes into it knowing that he's not going in to continue to live in the label of addict. He's going in to live in like the life of wholeheartedness. That's the idea. So if I'm marketing to him like, dude, you're a total sex addict. Yep, you need to join this group. That is not healthy.
Well, and usually what happens is you're not just marketing to him, you're marketing to his spouse and talking. I'm saying the bad way of going about things, telling the spouse how addicted he is and how, he needs to work on this behavior and he's not okay. So now the spouse and him both believe that he's this mentally ill, addicted person that needs to go into this group. We're not helping that guy.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. But we would be helping that guy if he came to us and he's like, hey, it's a problem. And we said, okay, this is what we try to get every one of our guys to say is, I have a problem. This is a serious problem because it's causing these things in my life. And I'm going to be responsible to take that on. Right. It's the labeling that is the problem. Right. It's, like, and of course, if I'm sitting there marketing, like he's acting out once a year and I'm turning to his wife and being like, can you this guy totally needs help. Like,
but Tyler, when you're doing an assessment, kind of the end goal is in a way to label. Now I'm, like, hey, this is how bad
you're trying to figure out how significant the issue is in a person's life.
Right. And so if I say to a man, you need a group once a week because you're struggling with an addiction, that's fine. But I better get that right as I'm doing that assessment, because if I'm getting that wrong and I'm labeling somebody in the wrong way, it causes all kinds of problems.
In some ways, yeah. But even that, like, you need a group once a week because you're struggling with an addiction is different than, dude, you're an addict. Like, at least the way that people interpret things, right? Like, that's the issue. That's what I'm trying to say is.
But in some way, is it problematic to put a guy in a group who is masturbating once a year? Because maybe it's like, dude, what's most therapeutic for you is to like forgive yourself, move on, you're okay. Like,
Yeah.
don't spend your money and your time acting as if you have this massive problem.
Yeah. You're saying that putting him into a group reinforces that it's a bigger problem than it actually is on some occasion.
Well, Tyler, there's this thing that you and I know, which is like connection with good men is awesome.
Oh,
And so
man.
I think a good group for any man is good.
Any man
Right.
should be in some kind of an awesome group.
And you and I believe in
Yeah.
groups, and we feel like we get our groups to this place where we love. It's kind of like what happened at Rising Sun, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like, yeah, if my son wanted to go to a group, when he was 22, and he's like, dude, dad, I got some issues I want to work through. I just want some support. I want to feel some brotherhood. Like, heck yeah. If my son came to me and said, I'm a piece of crap, I masturbate once a year, I need to stop that behavior, what group should I go to? And he goes to Jodi, or he goes to one of these programs that takes advantage of people in that situation, then I'm going to have a big problem with that. Right? Do you see the difference?
Yes, but there's another one in the middle of that too, which is, hey, Dad, I have this issue. I want it to stop. I don't. There's no other group to find other than these groups. I know I'm not a full addict, but man, I could get some brotherhood, and I do need to work on those issues. Like, yeah, of course. Like, I just had a conversation with one of my group members. We were in group just a couple of weeks ago, and one of the guys raised his hand and said, How come there's not just groups like this for every man? Like, why does it have to be a sex addiction group? And I was
a lot of people,
that's the point though. That's the beauty of it is that people only come to these kinds of things if they find some kind of a pain point or a pinch point that tells them, oh, I want to change something or I want to do something different. Otherwise they don't seek out the benefits that come from a group like
that. But the guys that end up in our groups are the guys with scrupulosity or the guys with real addiction. Right?
Sometimes, yeah, both.
In many ways, yeah. So, from the outside, Tyler, like you and I understand what a good group is and how a good group helps a person and all those things, right?
Yes.
But from the outside, from an outsider's perspective, it's like, whoa, you're throwing people in groups that probably don't need a group, and you're labeling them as a sex addict.
Yes.
Right. I could see why that could be seen as problematic.
Sure, of course.
Right.
Yes. Yeah, that makes sense.
And I think, if you were to interview a lot of the guys that have been through Tyler's groups, what you would hear is things like, I experience love there. I'm pushed to challenge my shame. A lot of my groups, back in the day, Tyler, I wasn't treating the sex addiction. I was treating the shame and the scrupulosity. They'd go home from group and they'd talk to their spouse about what they worked on, and they'd be like, "What? Like, that's what you talked about? That's so different than what we expected going into this. We expected you to figure out how not to touch your freaking penis. Like, that's what this is all about."
Yeah.
And you're talking about how to own your sexuality and step into your masculinity.
Right.
What?
Yeah.
Right. But a lot of these programs miss some of those things.
Right. Well, yeah.
And the person running the program misses it too.
I think so. And I think sometimes it's like we all have this happen from time to time where we get distracted away from like the core principle of why we choose to do something or not. And we get so focused on the end result that the focus on the end result never finds itself or gets produced because you don't do the work to actually get to the end result. And you talk about this a lot, Brannon. The inputs in some ways become more important than the outcomes because the outcomes come as a result of the inputs. Right. we had a guy in our retreat just this weekend. One of the things that he said the very last day was, he said, I thought I was coming here to overcome a sexual compulsive behavior. And he's like, you guys didn't talk about that at all. He's like, what I realized is that I'm actually leaving here needing to go and deal with my issues around forgiveness and shame and my masculinity and
my connection to God.
But he was grateful for that. It was clicking for him in a way that was like, oh, I thought I was coming to learn the top 10 ways not to act out. And Instead, I got a brotherhood, and I got a big dose of what I need to let go of and find forgiveness for, and let go of my own self-resentment, and
learn how to love myself.
it was about love, right?
Yeah. But Tyler, we're talking sure, you and I coming off Rising Sun, we're talking about like, I believe real recovery. And a lot of these programs that like, they are set up to not create real recovery. And
it's a messy road too, Brannon. I think like, I mean, let's honestly look at both of ourselves. Like, over the years, I know you, Brannon. I know your heart is pure. I know it's good. I know you genuinely, deeply want to help people.
right.
And there have been some clients or some things that maybe you've done over the years that probably haven't been the most effective.
Right. But there's like, I think I can see where you're going with this. Like, I've totally screwed up and made
Me
mistakes.
too.
And I've been a part of creating some of these shameful systems, and I'm working extremely hard to undo that and to shift out of that. But yeah, I'd like to believe that my heart has been good and I do what I do to help people.
Yes.
But that's not the case for all of these programs. Many of these programs are about money. They're about taking advantage of the systems that are there. So they might as well set up their programs to really work to take advantage of those systems and on the back end, people are harmed, people are hurt. But they create those systems anyways because they know that people are going to funnel into their practice if they speak the language the right way. And their groups will fill up, and then they'll validate the unhealthy systems and create the shame even more. And so, yeah, I know your heart's good, Tyler. I know you're fighting for real recovery. I know you're not trying to harm anybody. I know that about you, right? And I recommend go to Tyler's groups.
But
Go ahead.
no, go ahead.
And there's systems out there that aren't like that and do harm. And right? See what I'm saying?
Right. Well, but yeah, and that's what I'm saying though, is that to me, like, again, we're getting into the either or kind of talk, when in reality it's but for the grace of God go I kind of concept, where both of us, even with our hearts being directed towards genuinely wanting to help, sometimes have not helped people. And there's like, I think there's more of a scale or a spectrum where people go on and, there's a tendency for people, especially when they've been harmed, to go on a witch hunt. And the way that you go on a witch hunt is you go and you just try to tear down everything that seems to have some kind of an appearance to something, when in reality, there's a lot of these people in places there's
nuance.
The truth is that all of us human beings, this is the nature of being human, is that there's all good and bad to all of us. And it's a mistake anytime you go one way or the other without acknowledging the both. And some programs might lean a little bit more towards being more unhealthy. Some are maybe even evil, you might say. Others.
Oh, hey, you said it.
What's that?
You said it.
Said what?
You're so kind and so like forgiving and like, but you just said some could be evil. I just want to highlight that.
And I'll even say that with the least amount of label as possible. Like, people hear that word evil, and that what they hear, because of the way they've been acculturated, is terrible, horrible, worthless, no good. And I'm not saying that. Evil is just basically at odds with goodness. And
okay.
So, right.
All right.
So with that, but the other side of that too, Brannon, is that there's good and bad in all of it. And it's about finding a place where it feels genuine, that the goodness is directed towards moving forward and growth, knowing that there's going to be some humanness in all of that, instead of getting caught in a program that's just straight compulsiveness.
Well, and we talked about this recently, I think if you go to get help and you feel like yucky, like this is not helping, something's completely off here. You don't give blind trust just across the board just because they have letters behind their name, right?
Right.
Where you can say, okay, maybe they're not completely evil, but their program's definitely not helpful. So I'm out. I'm going to go find one that is helpful. And I say that hesitantly because some people want to bail on therapy when it gets hard. It's not about it not being hard. You want therapy to challenge you and push you, but there's a different feeling when it's like, this just doesn't feel right. Like the principles here that are being taught doesn't feel like truth to me. So I need to search out something different, something more.
Right.
Yeah. I just think, Tyler, whenever the basis is about control, then it leads to fear and shame, right? Whenever the basis is about love, then it leads to freedom, it leads to connection, it leads to intimacy, just really good things. And so whether it's a sex addiction group or a whatever group, if that's where they're coming from, then goodness is going to happen. Right.
There's the two main, we talk about this a lot in all of our podcasts, but this is just something I believe and I've experienced. There's different fuel sources for motivation. And if the primary fuel source is compulsion, fear, and shame, then you get more of that. And if the primary fuel source is love, and love still includes boundaries, you're going to get more of that. And you're going to find progress and peace and joy and connection. And it's just making sure that you're engaged in, when you choose to find your help, you're engaging in places where you can feel and know at the core that the fuel source is one of love. And if you're showing up and all you're getting is compulsion, then you should look elsewhere.
Right. Yep. I think this whole thing that, like, the whole Jodi thing's kind of blowing up, and I think this is a good thing. I think it's a good thing for all of us practitioners and therapists, and to take a step back and really look at, okay, like what kind of work do we really want to do? And have I been a part of some of the harmful things?
Mm-hmm.
And if I have, then how can I shift? How can I change? How can I fight for real recovery? And not fall into the traps of, kind of the rigid systems and shame-based things. So yeah, I'm glad we could talk about it, Tyler. I'm sure people have questions and thoughts about this. I'm sure people have also been in different programs and felt the differences between the things that we're saying, right?
Yeah.
So.
Yep. So my fear with this kind of a conversation is that we live in a world where people kind of systematically move themselves further and further into their own echo chamber to hear the things that they want to hear the most. And instead of finding the middle ground perspective, which I think is usually the most accurate place.
It's interesting, Tyler. I ran a group, and the very next day I got an email that said, like, that was like the worst group ever. Like, you came down too hard on us. You're too rigid. Like, that was horrible. And 5 minutes later, I got an email. That was the worst group ever. You're too soft. You don't hold people accountable.
Yeah, right. Which is a whole other factor of, like, each individual is going to interpret those things on their own thing. And that's the one thing that people leave out of these conversations all the time, is that at the end of the day, every individual is still responsible for their own choices, their own values, their own actions about whether or not they choose to stay or go to whatever program they choose. They're not victims. And when we talk about shame, this is a whole other podcast episode, but this is something I feel really strongly about, that when people go, you shamed me, what you need to do is you need to look at yourself and say, I'm owning my own shame, right?
Yeah.
You're the one who's actually believing whatever the person did to shame you. So get in your own belief system and go to work on owning that part of your work.
Yeah. We were talking before we started recording, Tyler, because I totally agree with what you just said. Ruby Franke is sitting in jail. And she's sitting there because of the choices that she made. Now, she chose to follow Jodi. She chose to get brainwashed. She chose to go along with everything she ever said. But Ruby didn't have the wherewithal to stand up and say, no, this doesn't work for me. That's on her. that is on.
Eventually she's going to need, for her sake, for her own freedom, she's going to have to come to that conclusion for herself. Right. That's the truth for every single one of us is that we always give away our power to other people because we love being stuck in the victim mode, when in reality, we always have our own power. It's always there with us.
And Tyler, that does not let the Jodis off the hook.
Right.
In that Jodi, what she does is not okay.
Yes.
She is accountable. She's a licensed therapist where people are coming and giving their trust, and that is not okay. So both are true. Like,
yes,
she is responsible for her own choices in her own life. Ruby is, right?
Yes.
And Jodi needs to be held accountable for taking advantage of people
both
in a very vulnerable moment and driving home messages of shame and on all those things.
And when you say that, I hope you say it not with an axe to grind, but with a desire for freedom for all parties involved. Like, that's what
Absolutely.
I'm getting at. Like, the goal is freedom, and freedom comes with accountability. So,
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Interesting conversation, Tyler. You and I have been in this, in the game, behind the scenes. We know of people, we know a lot of people who have developed programs, who have run programs, who have done things for a long, long time. So I think we have a pretty unique perspective on this one.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think we've even just kind of scratched the surface too a little bit. I'm sure we'll talk about it in the future too, but thank you to those of you guys who are listening here. Like Brannon said, we'd love to hear your feedback and your thoughts on whatever it is that we're discussing. And, we'd also love to hear from if there's things that you'd love to hear us talk about that we're not talking about as much. Please get on and send us a message or come on the show with us.
Thanks, guys. We'll see you.